Oh boy.
What do we know about that? What do we know about happiness in general? What do we know about feeling well? Now, one of the things that's very interesting to me always is that there are researches done, and I've named this a lot of times, is that if you earn more than $70,000 in the US, your happiness level doesn't increase anymore based on the amount of earnings you have. Now, that's a lot of money, you know what I mean? Now, what I question often is that what does that mean, because it's an average. There are a lot of people who have in that research, not everybody uses that money to the right things, but it's an average. So let's kind of say, what would you buy of 70,000 euros? What some essential things? Well, I think that to a certain extent, this gives you, clothing, a house, health insurance, economical freedom or safety. I think safety was a better word. And it gives you the capability of having some autonomy in your life. You don't live from paycheck to paycheck. You can make choices. You can negotiate with people because you have money. You're a little bit more free from economy and other people because you have some earnings. So these things actually really affect your well-being on a physical level. So if you live paycheck to paycheck, your stress level will be higher, you will have less autonomy about your life, and that will decrease the well-being that you experience or that you are physically, and therefore the chance of being happy is automatically, less. Doesn't mean that you don't have to be, but there are a lot of things that can influence it. So there's done an experiment once, and there was a result. I'm not so sure about the numbers right now. I think for 40% of your happiness is done by external factors, 10% is done by social influence, and 50% is in your own hands. Something like that. I think 50% was in your own hands, and the other things were done by external things. Now, for instance, your nature. 40% was nature, 10% was the social influence, and 50% was your own influence. So, to a certain extent, you do not influence completely if you're happy, yes or no. Definitely your genes have a factor in that. Now, if you're already a person that isn't that happy, generally from themselves, naturally speaking, that means that there's the 40%, and then in the 10% social influence, maybe you don't have the good people around you, maybe your situation isn't that good. And then next to that, you have a job with a low income, with that you can't pay for health insurance. So your security is less, your safety feels less. So the probability of you actually, feeling happy a lot of the times is not that high. So that's very much a way, I believe, to look at it. So what do you do in such a situation? Now, I think that to a certain extent you can influence certain things, especially when you already earn more. And that's really one of the problems here, is that if you live in a Western country, you have more options. Or not, I don't even say Western country, but if you just have more money, like, so the further you get to the $70,000 a month or a year, Jesus, the more options you do, because you have more autonomy about your life, so the more things you can start doing. You can start using your talents more in your work. You can start looking for different work. You can start working in things you like more. So therefore, you even have more probability of becoming more happy. But after that, it doesn't really matter how much more you earn. So there's certainly like a peak there, and I think that a lot of people should look at their lives a little bit more in that sense of, like, if you earn that type of money. And I think that in a lot of Western countries, because this is a study done in the US, but I think you can generalize it to a certain extent to other countries, that the amount of money isn't the same in every country. Certain countries get health insurance, from their government, like the Netherlands here. Certain countries don't, so there's also a difference in that. How expensive the country is and everything, you have to kind of calculate in. But if you earn around, let's say, 70,000, 50,000 euros or dollars a year, you should probably, be able to be happy. Now, that's a hard thing to say, because if you're not, then you're like, fuck you, Olaf. Like, that's a horrible thing to say. you have to see it as a skill, because your own well-being and the own way you are feeling well is a skill. You know, taking care of yourself, being well, it's a skill. It's based on knowledge and the way you portray yourself. Now, that is trainable. You know, you can train that. You can't train yourself to be happy, but you can train yourself to feel well and be well. Now, of course, the first thing that comes up in that idea is that, you know, being fit, doing exercises, you know, eating healthy. That I think that these sleeping enough, you know, 7 to 8 hours a night, might sound insanely a lot for some people, but that's what the research says is healthy. So I think that in these cases there's a lot of misunderstanding about happiness, and a lot of people choose for pleasure. And that means that also low income people choose for pleasure sometimes, because it's really shitty to not feel well. So instead of, you know, going for the long run game, you spend your money on pleasure, new clothes, new things, you know, and then you don't grow in the hierarchy, let's say, of happiness, and you don't get the autonomy at some point. You don't get the financial freedom, because you don't have to have that $70,000 a year. It's just a marker for things that you need, you know. So you can also establish economic safety by sparing up money, by investing money, by, you know, increasing the amount of money you earn in other expenses, by increasing your skills in other, you know, factors. There are a lot of things you can do.